You know, with so much tension in the world today, this virus called COVID and the other virus called racism and its root cause that I call classism, there's really no New Testament book or letter that more directly and clearly addresses that latter sickness of classism and racism. Jesus had a half-brother named James who addressed the way that we are governed in this country these days and the way that we Christians govern ourselves in front of this world that we live in. And James, he doesn't just speak in generalities about this, but it's really specific about our socially shallow spirituality. In a nutshell, I mean, the book of James is about the clash between classism and Christianity. And according to the dictionary, classism is discrimination on the basis of social class or economic status. So in other words, it's a system set up to benefit the upper class at the expense of the lower class. And James saw it in the church, and he saw it by the church, perpetrated by the church, and he wasn't having it. And his point is that any sort of Christian caste system is no Christianity at all. So let me just read some of the passages. I'm just giving an introduction here today, and let me just read some of the passages wherein James speaks specifically about our classist ways in America, including and most sadly in the American church. Let me just quote a few. The brother in humble circumstances, he says, ought to take pride in his high position. But the one who is rich should take pride in his low position, because he'll pass away like a wild flower. The rich man will fade away even while he goes about his business. Later he says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. And he says later, believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ must not show favoritism. And then he goes on to paint a picture, right, of two men coming to church, and the rich guy and the poor guy, and how they're treated differently. One gets the best seat in the house, the other has to sit on the floor. And about that, James says, have you not discriminated among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? He says, you have dishonored the poor. Is it not the rich who are exploiting you? Are they not the ones who are dragging you into court? Let me just ask you this. Does any of this sound familiar to you at all? He says, love your neighbor as yourself, but if you show favoritism, you sin and are convicted by the law as lawbreakers. Suppose a brother or sister, James says, is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to him, go in peace, keep warm and be well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? And then most scathing of all is in chapter 5, the last chapter. He says, now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is upon you. Your wealth has rotted and your moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You've hoarded wealth in the last days. Look, I've got mosquitoes coming after me here. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourself in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the innocent one. Boy, does that sound familiar? You have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you. I mean, does it sound like James is, watching the 6 o'clock news here, now? So classless Christianity, that is a Christianity that doesn't have a caste system in it, is the kind that treats everybody basically the same, where we preach and we practice an egalitarian treatment of one another. All humans, all divine image bearers, rich and poor, black and white and brown, powerful and powerless. Unfortunately, we tend to have a pretty class-filled country today, and it's played out in our streets, it's played out in our government, it's played out in our cities, and most unfortunately, it's played out in our churches. both in the pulpit and in the pews. And frankly, I'm appalled by some of the things that I hear some Christians say, and in some cases, they're just mimicking their pastors. You know, most people would say the key to James is a faith that works. Don't just say it, but do it. Faith without works is dead. And it's true that he pulled no punches to make his point about a do-nothing Christianity that is a no Christianity at all. But James had on his mind a particular kind of good works that give evidence of saving faith. He hated theoretical faith, but replaced it with something other than, much more than, theoretical good works. I mean, in other words, he had some things in mind that demonstrate authentic Christianity, the kind that hates classism. So he rebukes the powerful rich and encourages the vulnerable poor. He addresses the corporate kings of Wall Street and those who live on the street. He tells us that the only brand of Christianity that God accepts clashes with cultural classism. Look after orphans and widows, he says. Don't favor the rich over the poor at the church door. Don't be a bigot. Don't live in luxury and self-indulgence, but pay a decent wage to those who work for you. This is the gospel according to James. So, in that short introduction, I hope I've sufficiently intrigued you to continue on in this series. Read the letter of James yourself and see what you get out of it, and please come back for the next installment. So I'm keeping these talks, as you can see, short to whet your appetite for more. And this is an abridged version of my approach to the book of James. Check out the podcast that you'll find at soundcloud.com/musing the mysteries, and you'll see maybe a dozen or so teachings on audio teachings on the book of James that cover this in a more detailed way. God bless you.